The sound ripped through the valley at dawn like an animal in pain. Metal screamed against stone as a rusted shipping container slid down the hill, dragged by straining mules and heavy chains. Crows burst from the trees. Dogs barked until their throats cracked. Half a mile away, two ranchers leaned out their windows, watched the dust rise, and laughed just loud enough for their wives to hear. They said the same thing everyone else was thinking. God help her. She is building a coffin for her cows. At the center of it all stood Clara Dalton, 51 years old, shoulders squared, jaw tight as rock. Her black funeral veil was still folded in the pocket of her coat from the spring before. Her boots broke frost as she walked the ridgeline, guiding the mules with steady hands. The container was dented, scarred with rust and heavy as sin. The hillside looked ready to swallow it whole, but Clara had shaped that slope herself, digging and hauling dirt for weeks. She had slipped, fallen, and bled into the soil, and she did not care. She was not here to look sensible. She was here to finish something before winter came. People whispered when she passed. They said grief had cracked her mind. They said she thought she lived in some big city port. They said metal would freeze harder than wood, that steel would turn into a meat locker by January. They did not know what Clara knew. They did not know she had spent nights with borrowed books and worn manuals, tracing diagrams by lantern light. They did not know she had written letters east, begging for old army papers about storage bunkers and buried shelters. Most of all, they did not know why she was racing the sky. The old barn had burned in the spring. A storm lantern had tipped when a calf kicked free. The fire took the roof first, then the beams. Clara's husband, Walter, ran inside to free the last cow. He never came back out. By the time the town marshal arrived, the barn was a black shell, and Walter was gone. Clara stood in the smoke holding a single bell collar, her hands shaking, her face empty. They buried Walter 2 days later. On the third day, Clara walked her land in hard, measured steps and began to plan. Everyone expected her to rebuild the old way. Logs, timber, something familiar. Clara chose steel. The containers came one by one. Some were already on her land, left over from old mining work, rusting near the creek. Others she bought cheap from a scrapyard 2 towns over. Every few days, she hitched the mules and dragged another steel box into the clearing behind her house. Each time more neighbors came to watch. A man named Merle Sutter leaned on his horse one afternoon and called out that this was not Chicago. He told her steel trapped cold. He told her she was wasting her strength. Clara did not look at him. She lifted her pry bar, wedged it under the container's corner, and kept working. When she finally stood and met his eyes, dirt streaked across her face and blood seeping through her gloves. Merle lost his smile and rode away. The work was ugly. Clara cut doors into the steel with a second-hand torch. She welded hinges using tools Walter had left behind. She stacked hay bales between containers and packed earth around them, covering everything with sod and tarps. She sealed gaps with mud, drilled vents, and lined them with burlap. When neighbors saw her running gutter pipes from her house to the barn roof, they laughed harder. They asked if she planned to drain her roof into her cows. She did not answer. She never explained that the runoff would melt snow and feed into clay pipes buried beneath the barn floor. She never said that the pipes would carry faint warmth through the ground. She never said this was her own design. At night, she wrote notes in a spiral notebook, changing things, improving them. Always, she thought of Walter. She imagined what he would say about sailing a steel ship into winter. She imagined his laugh and kept working. The first cold came early. Frost coated the valley before October ended. A thin snow settled on roofs. Hinges froze. Cattle breathed white clouds into the air. Inside her barn, Clara listened to the steel creak as it shrank in the cold. The heat from the buried pipes was faint but steady. She guided her cows into the central container, the warmest one, and watched steam rise from their backs. It was not comfort, but it was life. November followed with teeth. A storm tore over the ridge, screaming like something alive. Snow buried fences. Roofs sagged and split. A family miles away was trapped when their porch collapsed. The postman's mule froze standing up. Clara fed her cows through a side hatch, sealed the doors tighter, and wrapped her cabin in stacked hay. Her kitchen stayed just above freezing. Her water did not turn to ice. She checked the animals 3 times a day, hands raw, breath fogging the air. By the second week, neighbors began to appear at her fence. Merle came first, hat in hand, his barn roof crushed under snow. He asked if she had space. Clara nodded once. The Whitman boys followed, sheep shivering behind them. Their troughs had frozen solid. Clara opened the hatch and let the warmth spill out. Then came the preacher's daughter with a single goat wrapped in a quilt. One by one, those who mocked her came asking. Clara did not smile, but she let them in. The storm did not end. It only changed. One morning, a deep crack echoed through the valley. The town's wooden bridge at Sparrow's Ford gave way, half of it sliding into the river. By nightfall, everyone east of the water knew they were cut off. No supplies could come through. And in the same hour, word spread that a boy was missing. Jacob Harper was 12. He had last been seen heading toward the ridge alone. When the knock came at Clara's door, the wind was so loud she almost missed it. Henry Whitman stood outside, face white with frost, eyes wide with fear. The boy was gone. People were searching, but the storm was getting worse. Clara did not hesitate. She grabbed her coat, tucked her revolver into her belt for signaling, and took the mule's reins. The search party gathered near the old pine that marked the shortcut to the ford. Tracks vanished almost as soon as they were made. Wind tore at their voices. Clara studied the land, thinking like she always did. A boy would not head straight into the wind. He would look for shelter. She took the eastern rise alone. Hours later, she found a small hunting lean-to near the ridge. Inside, curled and barely breathing, was Jacob. She wrapped him in her coat and carried him back through snow that burned her face and stole her breath. The doctor could not reach them. Roads were gone. Clara cleared space in the warmest part of her barn and laid the boy on straw over steel. She boiled water, heated stones, and worked through the night. By morning, Jacob lived. People gathered outside the barn, silent, waiting. Inside, warmth held against the cold. No one laughed now. No one questioned steel. Smoke curled from Clara's vents like a signal against the white sky. But as the storm pressed on and the river shifted under its ice, Clara knew this winter was not finished with them yet. The valley learned a new rhythm after that night. It was no longer marked by sunrise and sunset, but by the sound of Clara's boots on steel, the hiss of steam from the pipes, and the low murmur of people breathing together in the dark. The barn was full now. Families slept shoulder to shoulder. Animals shifted and stamped, their warmth adding to the thin heat that clung inside the walls. The smell of hay, smoke, and damp wool filled the air. It was not comfort, but it was safety. Clara did not rest. Each morning before light, she walked the barn's length, checking vents, tapping seams, feeling for cold leaks with bare hands. She adjusted tarps, packed snow into gaps, and rewired stovepipes when frost crept too close. Her notebook grew thick with notes. Airflow, condensation, heat loss. She wrote names now, too. Who slept where? Who needed more blankets? Who coughed in the night? The town came apart outside those walls. Roofs collapsed under weight they were never built to hold. Firewood stacks froze into useless blocks. Wells iced over. Horses slipped and broke legs. Every day, someone knocked at Clara's gate. She never turned anyone away. Space was made. Straw was spread. People learned to move quiet and slow, to save heat and breath. One night, the wind shifted. It came hard from the north and tore at the tarps like hands clawing cloth. A seam ripped. Cold poured in. Cattle bawled and stamped. Children cried. Clara ran barefoot across steel, hammer in one hand, tarp in the other. Her fingers split and bled as she nailed the fabric down again, packing snow and mud over the edge until it froze solid. By dawn, the barn held. Clara slid down the wall and sat with her eyes closed, breath shallow, hands shaking. Merle Sutter found her there. He said her name softly, then again. When she opened her eyes, he held out a hammer. His voice cracked when he spoke. He said they had been wrong. He said no, one else would have thought of this. Clara took the hammer and stood. They worked side by side without another word. Then came fire. It started miles away, lightning striking a homestead roof despite the snow. The blaze ran fast. Sparks carried on dry wind. When someone shouted flames, Clara was already moving. She ran to the northern edge of her land, where an old outbuilding stood half buried under hay. Fire licked at its side. She grabbed a spade and kicked open a trench she had started months before, a fire break she never finished. She screamed for snow, for water, for anything. People came running. Buckets flew. Shovels bit into frozen ground. The flames hissed and died inches from the barn's edge. That night, they stood silent around the central stall. It showed the barn square and strong, with small figures clustered around it and a sun drawn high behind. Clara held it with both hands and thought of Walter. She did not cry. She simply nodded once. The cold pressed on, and then it changed again. Late January brought a strange warmth, just enough to weaken ice. The river did not freeze clean. It cracked and groaned, black water moving beneath a white skin. Clara watched the ridgeline with a tight chest. She knew what melt could do to pack snow. She had planned for flooding, but what came was not water alone. The sound arrived first, low and rolling, like the ground tearing itself open. Trees snapped, fences vanished. A wall of slush and ice came roaring down from the south, dragging branches and rocks with it. The lower pasture disappeared in seconds. A trough the size of a horse flew through the air and shattered. Clara shouted orders that cut through panic. Everyone out, uphill, now. No one questioned her. They grabbed children, blankets, coats. Clara carried 2 toddlers at once and shoved them into waiting arms. Water slammed into the barn's outer wall with a sound like cannon fire. Steel groaned. Earth shifted. But the containers held, buried deep and locked into the clay. Clara ran back inside once. Against every rule she had made, she snatched Jacob's drawing from under a feed bucket. Then she heard the scream. Bessie, the old milker, had slipped. Her leg was trapped in a soft patch where straw hid an unfinished drain. She kicked and bellowed, eyes wild. Water surged closer. Clara threw her weight against the animal, arms locked around its neck, muscles screaming. She yelled for help, but the others were already gone. The cow lurched. Something snapped. With a final heave, the hoof came free. Bessie stumbled forward limping, and Clara drove her toward the hatch. They cleared the barn just as water swallowed the lower field. The surge passed as fast as it came. When the freeze returned, it locked the damage in place. The barn was battered. One container had shifted. Pipes were clogged with silt. Tarps were torn. A vent was gone. One cow could barely stand. But no one had died. Not a single life was lost. In the weeks that followed, something in the town changed. People did not whisper when Clara passed. They asked questions. They brought tools. They offered hands. Clara showed them how to weld seams and bury pipes. She drew diagrams on flour sacks. She stood in Merle's blacksmith shop and oversaw a line of work like a general. When she spoke, people listened. A letter came from the east, stamped and official, praising the design and asking to study it. Clara folded it and set it aside. Praise did not matter. Winter was still there. She rebuilt what the flood had damaged. She raised one container higher. She added sand walls and deeper trenches. She taught 2 girls to weld and 3 boys to read thermometers. By fall, other container barns began to rise in the valley, rough and uneven but standing. When the next snow fell, they stood. But winter was not done testing them. December came darker than before. Snow fell day after day. Firewood ran low. Then the wind came wrong, swirling from a canyon that had never blown air before. It cut through cracks like knives. That was when the Davidson twins vanished. 6 years old, gone in minutes. Panic spread like fire. Clara stood still, listening to the wind, reading the snow. She took her lantern and went alone toward the natural trench west of town. She slid down into it and listened. A whimper cut through the howl. She found the girls half buried, clinging to each other, blue with cold. She carried them back, her legs burning, eyes stinging. At the barn, space opened without a word. Stones were heated. Broth was poured. Blankets wrapped small bodies. The twins lived. That night, Clara did not sleep. She sat by the central stove and watched the light dance on steel walls. She thought of fire and ice, and the way the land kept trying to take people back. By midwinter, the barn held dozens. A baby was born in a corner under a tarp. An old man died warm, with prayers whispered into his ear. They marked the days on the wall. 27 slashes. On the 28th day, the wind stopped. Morning came bright and cruel. The sky cleared. Snow glittered like glass. Cabins lay broken across the valley. The barn stood whole, steam rising from its vents, voices echoing inside. People said many things after that storm. They said it was the worst in memory. They said the mountains had spoken, but they also said one thing clearly: the barn had beaten it. And as spring crept closer, heavy with melt and mud, Clara knew another reckoning was coming. Winter had tested steel. Now the land itself would have its turn. Spring did not arrive gently. It came heavy and wet, tearing at everything winter had left behind. Snow collapsed into mud. Roads vanished into ruts. Cabins that survived the cold sagged and split as soaked beams gave way. Firewood stacks turned black and useless. Fences leaned like tired men. The valley smelled of rot and thaw, and for the first time since the storms began, people were not afraid of freezing. They were afraid of collapse. Clara worked through it without pause. She shoveled silt from beneath the stalls, reset drainage lines, and hammered steel back into place where the flood had nudged it loose. The barn was scarred now, dented and streaked with rust, but it stood. Inside, it stayed dry. It stayed warm enough. It stayed alive. By late spring, something unspoken had become truth. The barn was no longer just Clara's. It was where people gathered when things broke. When a family from the Northern Trail arrived with nothing but a wagon and 2 thin horses, they were sent straight to her gate. When the preacher's roof finally caved, his books were stacked inside her walls until a schoolhouse could be built. When another widow lost her goats to exposure, she asked Clara to teach her how to weld. Clara never gave speeches. She showed people where to cut, where to bury, where to seal. She told them steel was not strong by itself. It needed earth. It needed patience. It needed hands that did not quit. By summer, 3 more container buildings rose across the valley. One became a shared school, another a feed shed. The third belonged to a woman named Sophie, who had lost 2 sons in the ice and swore no animal would freeze on her land again. When Sophie's roof tore loose in a sudden wind, Clara was there before dawn, welding pins into place and reinforcing the frame. When Sophie asked why she helped, Clara shrugged and said, "Steel only works when it is connected." The stories spread beyond the valley. A photographer came once and tried to take a picture. Clara waved him away. She told him to come back in January if he wanted proof. Still, the paper ran a piece and called her the Iron Widow. People she had never met began sending letters. Some praised her. Some asked for plans. Some warned her she was changing things too fast. Clara did not answer most of them. When autumn came again, she was ready earlier than anyone else. Trenches were deeper. Fire breaks were wider. Vents were doubled. She trained children how to seal gaps and test air. She taught them to listen to steel the way others listened to wood. The barn expanded again, forming a wide curve open to the south. A proper infirmary took shape. A kitchen followed, its stove built from a water tank and vented through 3 chimneys. That winter, people did not wait until they were desperate. They came early, bringing food, tools, and hands willing to work. The barn filled with quiet purpose. A child learned to walk on its dirt floor. An old man passed away warm, his breath slow and peaceful. No one froze. No one starved. One day, someone painted words on the east wall in whitewash. Clara's house. Clara saw it and snorted, but she did not scrub it away. In early spring, another letter arrived. This one carried a heavy seal and careful words. It offered money, support, and a formal roll advising on cold shelters for new territories. Clara read it once, folded it, and slid it behind her kettle. She did not need an office to know what winter did to people. A week later, Jacob Harper came to her by the north wall. He was 17 now, tall and thin, hands scarred from welding. He said he wanted to build one himself, far east on new land. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She asked if he knew how cold it could get. He nodded. She asked what broke first. He answered without hesitation. The seams. She told him to go and not make it pretty. She told him to build it so it would not die. By the fourth winter, a dozen barns like hers dotted the valley. None were exact copies. Each carried small changes, small lessons learned. Children born inside those walls grew without, knowing the sound of teeth chattering in the dark. When they asked where the idea came from, they were told about a widow who dragged steel down a hill while people laughed. Clara grew quieter with age. Her hands stiffened. Her breath wheezed on cold mornings. Still, she worked. She patched. She taught. She prepared. She knew winters were patient, and patience always won in the end. She passed away one summer morning with the sun high and the field quiet. One hand rested in her lap, still rough from a life of work. They did not bury her in the churchyard. They laid her beneath the first container she ever welded, wrapped in canvas and straw, and sealed the stall closed. Above the door they carved a name, Widow of Steel. The barn still stands. More rust now, more patches, but it stays warm. It stays full. It hums with breath and life. Because one woman did not wait for permission, because she built when others laughed. Because when winter came, she was ready.